"I speak 10 languages," the young woman said, her hands cuffed. The judge erupted in laughter. "Sure you do, and I'm a polyglot," he scoffed before the entire court. But when she opened her mouth, his laughter froze. The High Court of Justice courtroom had never been so full. Every seat occupied, people leaning against the walls, journalists with their cameras off, waiting for the precise moment to capture the news of the day. The collective murmur created a symphony of anticipation that vibrated through the air conditioning of the old Justice building. Aminata Bello walked towards the stand, her hands cuffed. Her steps echoed in the sudden silence that fell as Bailiff Raymond Cooper boomed, "All rise. The court is now in session." Everyone stood as Justice Harrison Mitchell entered through the side door, carrying a messy pile of documents. He was a robust man with perfectly slick-back gray hair, and the kind of expression that only years of sentencing others' lives can sculpt onto a face, a mixture of boredom, superiority, and occasional disdain. "You may be seated," Mitchell ordered, dropping the documents onto his desk with a thud that startled several people present. Aminata remained standing between two bailiffs, with Fatima Abdul, her public defender, to her left. Fatima was a middle-aged woman burdened by too many cases and too little budget. She had prominent dark circles under her eyes and that barely perceptible tremor in her hands that betrays too much caffeine and too little sleep. "Case number 47B 2024, the court clerk announced. The State versus Aminata Bello. Charges: electronic fraud, identity theft, and aggravated swindling. The murmur returned to the room like a wave. Aminata felt hundreds of eyes drilling into her back, judging her before any evidence was presented. She knew that feeling. She had felt it her whole life. Prosecutor Thomas Bradford stood up with theatrical movements, adjusting his tie as if he were an actor at the premiere of a play. He was a thin man with sharp features, who spoke with that upper-class accent that immediately establishes hierarchies in any room. "Your Lordship," Bradford began, his voice resonant, "we have before us a young woman who has perpetrated one of the most elaborate frauds this court has ever seen. For months, Miss Bello posed as a certified translator, offering services to multinational corporations, educational institutions, and even government agencies." He paused dramatically, walking slowly in front of the jury. "She collected thousands of dollars for translations she supposedly performed in 10 different languages. 10, Your Lordship. But the reality is that this young woman barely finished secondary school and has no certification, no degree, no credentials to back her supposed linguistic ability." Bradford turned to Aminata with a smile that pretended to be compassionate but dripped with condescension. "We understand that economic need can drive people to make wrong decisions, but fraud is fraud, regardless of the circumstances." Aminata clenched her fists inside her cuffs. Every word from the prosecutor was like a hammer blow to her dignity, not because they were true, but because no one seemed interested in hearing her side. Justice Mitchell flipped through the documents with a bored expression, as if this were just another case on his endless list of judicial responsibilities. He yawned without bothering to cover his mouth. "Does the defense have anything to say before we proceed?" he asked in a monotonous tone, without even looking up from his papers. Fatima Abdul cleared her throat. Her hands trembled as she clutched her worn notebook. "Your Lordship, my client maintains her innocence. The charges presented are based on misunderstandings and a lack of communication with her employers. Miss Bello is willing to demonstrate that she possesses the abilities she claims." "Demonstrate?" Mitchell finally looked up, his eyebrows arching with mocking interest. "And how exactly do you plan to prove you speak 10 languages? Are you going to sing us a song in each one?" A few nervous laughs erupted from the audience. The judge smiled, pleased with his own humor. "Your Lordship, with all due respect," Fatima tried to continue, but Mitchell interrupted her with a wave of his hand. "Miss Abdul, I have reviewed this case. Your client is 23 years old. She grew up in a low-income neighborhood, and according to records, she worked as an office cleaner before this supposed translation business." He looked directly at Aminata. "There is no record of higher education, no international certification, nothing to suggest this young woman could speak even 3 languages, let alone 10. It was then that Aminata lifted her head. Her eyes, which had remained fixed on the floor throughout the hearing, met the judge's directly. There was fire in that gaze. There were years of humiliation, of being underestimated, of being invisible. "Permission to speak, Your Lordship," she said, her voice clear and firm. Mitchell looked at her, surprised. Most defendants remained silent during preliminary hearings, letting their lawyers speak for them. But there was something in the way this young woman looked at him that caused him a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "Do you have anything relevant to add to the case?" he asked skeptically. I speak 10 languages, Aminata pronounced each word with crystalline clarity, without a hint of doubt in her voice. And I can prove it right here, right now, if your lordship permits me. The silence that followed was so profound that the hum of the ceiling fluorescent lights could be heard. Everyone present leaned forward, as if the universe itself held its breath. And then, Justice Harrison Mitchell did something no one expected. He threw his head back and let out a roar of laughter. It wasn't a polite or contained laugh. It was a booming, almost hysterical guffaw that made his corpulent figure vibrate on the bench. "This is incredible," he exclaimed between laughs, wiping tears from his eyes with a handkerchief. "The defendant wants to show us she speaks 10 languages here in my court." Other laughter joined the judges. Prosecutor Bradford was grinning widely, shaking his head in disbelief. Some members of the public were openly laughing, others were whispering mocking comments. "Miss Bello," Mitchell managed to control his laughter enough to speak, though his voice still trembled with amusement. "I appreciate your creativity, but this is a court of justice, not a television talent show. We are not going to waste the court's time with circus demonstrations. Is justice a circus to you?" Aminata's voice cut through the air like a knife. The judge's laughter froze instantly. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a dangerous silence filled the room. "Excuse me." His voice dropped to a menacing tone. Aminata took a step forward. Ignoring the warning tug, Fatima Mendoza gave her arm. "With all due respect, your lordship, you just laughed at me without listening to me. You judged me without allowing me to present my defense. If that's not a circus, I don't know what is." Bailiff Cooper stepped forward, ready to intervene if the situation escalated, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. Mitchell leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You have guts, Miss Bello. I'll give you that. But guts won't save you from the evidence against you." "The evidence lies," Aminata retorted. "Or rather, the people who interpreted it lied because they never bothered to verify if I could actually do what I said." "And why would we do that?" Bradford interjected from his seat. "Why should the state spend resources verifying the fantastical claims of someone clearly trying to avoid the consequences of her actions? Because that is your obligation." Aminata turned to the prosecutor, her voice gaining strength. "Your obligation is to seek the truth, not to assume guilt based on prejudice." "Order!" Mitchell slammed his gavel on the desk. "Miss Bello, you are treading on dangerous ground. I suggest you keep silent before I charge you with contempt." Aminata took a deep breath. She could feel her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. But she wasn't going to back down. No, she had backed down her entire life. Not this time. "Your lordship," Fatima Abdul rushed to intervene, her voice trembling but determined. "I formally request that my client be allowed to demonstrate her linguistic abilities. If she can prove she speaks the languages she claims, that would fundamentally change the nature of this case." Mitchell looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. "Miss Abdul, are you really suggesting we turn this court into a language exam?" "I am suggesting we give my client the opportunity to defend herself properly," Fatima replied, finding a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Isn't that what justice represents?" The judge leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. He looked at Aminata for a long moment, his eyes evaluating her, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. There was something about this young woman that unsettled him. It wasn't just her audacity, it was the absolute certainty in her eyes. "All right," he said finally, to everyone's surprise in the room. "I will give you your chance to make a public fool of yourself, but when you fail, and you will fail, I will add charges of contempt and obstruction of justice to your already considerable list of legal troubles." He turned to his clerk. "Contact the State University's language department. I need them to send 10 professors, one specialist in each of the languages Miss Bello claims to speak." Aminata felt an electric jolt course through her body. Finally, she would have her chance. Finally, someone would hear her. "Miss Bello," Mitchell looked at her with that mocking smile he had perfected over decades. "I hope you know what you're doing. Because when this is over, I will not only declare you guilty of fraud, but the whole world will know exactly what kind of liar you are." "I am not a liar," Aminata replied, her voice calm but firm. "And when this is over, you will have to apologize." The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Justice Mitchell like that. "Silence!" The gavel struck again. Mitchell looked at Aminata with a mixture of fury and something that might have been respect. "This hearing is postponed until the evaluators are present. It will be in 3 days, and believe me, Miss Bello, those 3 days will be the last of freedom you enjoy for a long time." As the bailiffs escorted her out of the room, Aminata couldn't help but wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. or if she had finally taken the first step towards the vindication she so desperately craved. Little did she know, the coming days would reveal secrets that would change not only her destiny but that of everyone present in that room. The metallic clang of the closing doors echoed like thunder in Aminata's ears. The New Hope Pretrial Detention Center was a 3-story building that smelled of industrial disinfectant mixed with human desperation. The white walls, peeling at the corners, seemed to absorb all the natural light that tried to enter through the small, barred windows. Aminata walked down the corridor flanked by 2 officers. Her handcuffs had been removed, but the feeling of oppression remained, now invisible but heavier than any metal. Other inmates watched her from their cells, some with curiosity, others with that vacant stare that only prolonged confinement can create. Cell 47C, announced Officer Jessica Torres, a young woman with a professional but not cruel expression. She opened the metal door with a screech that echoed down the corridor. "You have a roommate. I hope you get along." Aminata entered, and the door closed behind her with a definitive thud that made her shiver. The cell was small. 2 narrow bunk beds, a small sink, a toilet with no privacy, and a window so high it only served to remind them that the outside world existed, but was out of reach. On the lower bunk, a middle-aged woman looked up from a worn book. Aminata Bello had lines etched on her face that told stories she would probably never share. Her graying hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her eyes, though tired, still held a spark of intelligence. "So, you're the famous polyglot," Carmen Estrada said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The whole center is talking about you. The girl who defied Justice Mitchell and lived to tell the tale." Aminata sat on the upper bunk, feeling the thin, hard mattress beneath her. She didn't answer immediately. She was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. The adrenaline of the hearing had evaporated, leaving only a heavy void in her chest. "I'm not famous," she finally said. "I'm just someone who got tired of being underestimated." Carmen let out a dry chuckle. "In here, we're all tired of something. The difference is, most have already given up. You still have fire. That's dangerous in a place like this." "Dangerous? Why?" "Because hope hurts more than resignation." Carmen closed her book. "You really speak 10 languages?" Aminata nodded, looking at the stained ceiling of the cell. 11, actually. But no one asked. 11, Carmen sat up, genuinely interested. How is it possible for a girl your age to speak 11 languages? For the first time in days, Aminata felt like talking. Perhaps because Carmen wasn't looking at her with mockery or disdain. Perhaps because in that small, claustrophobic space, they were both just 2 human beings trying to survive. "My grandmother," Aminata began, her voice softening with the memory. "Grandmother Lucia. She worked her whole life as a domestic worker for diplomatic families. Every time one family left, another arrived. Germans, French, Chinese, Russians, Arabs. She learned pieces of all those languages, to communicate, to be indispensable." Carmen listened in silence, and Aminata continued. "When my parents died in a bus accident, I was 5 years old. My grandmother took me in and brought me with her to all those houses. While she cleaned, cooked, and ironed, I sat with the children of those families. I played with them, ate with them, learned with them." Her voice cracked slightly as she remembered. "The diplomats changed every 2 or 3 years. Every time I made a friend, they left. Every time I learned to communicate perfectly in one language, a new family arrived with a different language. But I never stopped learning. It was my way of keeping those memories, those connections, alive." "And your grandmother?" Carmen asked softly. "She died 2 years ago. Heart attack. 50 years of working from sunup to sundown finally killed her." Aminata closed her eyes tightly. "And I was left alone, without formal education, without certificates to prove what I knew. Only languages in my head and no way to prove they were real." "So you started working as a translator," Carmen completed. "I tried to get employment with official agencies, but they all wanted university degrees, international certifications. No one wanted to give me even a chance to demonstrate what I could do." The frustration was palpable in her voice. "So I created my own business. I offered my services online, charged less than the big agencies, and did impeccable work." "Then why are you here?" Aminata opened her eyes and looked directly at Carmen. "Because someone decided it was impossible for a girl without a university education to do what I did. They reported my services as fraud, without even verifying the quality of my work. And now I'm here, waiting to prove something I should never have had to prove." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. The door opened, and Officer Torres appeared again. "Bello, you have a visitor? Consultation room." Aminata got down from the bunk, confused. She hadn't called anyone. She had no one to call. The consultation room was a small space divided by a metal table. Sitting on the other side was Fatima Mendoza, her public defender, but she wasn't alone. Next to her was a woman Aminata didn't know, elegant, professional, with a leather briefcase on the table. "Aminata, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez." Fatima made the introductions. She's a forensic psychologist. Prosecutor Bradford requested a psychological evaluation before the next hearing. Aminata felt a knot forming in her stomach. Psychological evaluation. Why? Dr. Vasquez spoke in a calm, professional voice. It's standard procedure in cases where the defendant exhibits behaviors that could be considered unusual. Your confrontation with Justice Mitchell raised some flags. Flags. Aminata felt indignation growing. Defending myself is unusual behavior? It's not about that, Fatima intervened quickly. Aminata, listen. The prosecutor is trying to build a profile, suggesting you have tendencies toward pathological fantasy. They want to argue that you genuinely believe you speak those languages when, in reality, you don't. That's ridiculous. I'm not crazy. No one is saying you are. Dr. Vasquez maintained her neutral tone. But I need to conduct my evaluation. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. For the next hour, Aminata answered question after question about her childhood, about her parents' deaths, about living with her grandmother, about learning languages, about feeling alone, about her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. Dr. Vasquez took meticulous notes, her expression unreadable. "One last question," she said finally. "Have you ever felt that people don't understand you, that you live in a different world than others?" Aminata thought carefully before answering. "Every day of my life, but not because I'm crazy, but because I've lived in worlds that most people will never experience. I've spoken in languages most will never learn. I've seen how words can build bridges or erect walls. So yes, I live in a different world, but it's real. It's as real as the prejudice that brought me here." The doctor closed her notebook. "Thank you for your cooperation, Aminata. I will submit my report before the hearing." When she left, Fatima approached Aminata, her expression worried. "There's something else you need to know. Justice Mitchell contacted the State University, but it wasn't just to get evaluators. He investigated your background further. He found something." Fatima pulled some documents from her bag. "Years ago, when you were 17, you applied for a scholarship at the International Language Academy. Do you remember?" Aminata nodded slowly. "They rejected me. They said my application was unrealistic because I claimed to speak too many languages for my age." "Exactly. And Mitchell is using that as evidence that you've been lying about your abilities for years. He's arguing it's a pattern of fraudulent behavior." The room seemed to shrink around Aminata. Every time she tried to move forward, the system pushed her back. Every attempt to prove her worth became another piece of evidence against her. "Is there anything else?" she asked, dreading the answer. Fatima hesitated before continuing. "The evaluators who are coming, Mitchell specifically requested the strictest professors, known for being extremely rigorous. They aren't coming to give you a fair chance, Aminata. They are coming to dismantle you." The ensuing silence was crushing. Aminata could feel the weight of the entire judicial system pressing against her, trying to crush that spark of hope that still burned in her chest. "How much time do I have?" she finally asked. 2 more days. The hearing is the day after tomorrow, so you need to use every second." Aminata stood up, her determination renewed despite everything. "Fatima, I need you to get me something. Books, study materials, in every language you can find. If they're going to make this difficult, then I'm going to prepare like I never have in my life." Fatima looked at her with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Aminata, even if you prove you speak those languages, the prosecutor has other charges. The clients who reported fraud, the complaints about incorrect translations." "Incorrect translations?" Aminata interrupted. "What incorrect translations?" "There are 3 clients who claim the translations you did contained serious errors that cost them money and reputation." Aminata felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "That's impossible. I checked every translation 3 times. I was meticulous. I would never, ever have delivered anything with serious errors." "Do you have copies of those translations?" "All of them, on my computer, but the police confiscated it as evidence." Fatima made a note. "I'll request access to those files. If we can prove the translations were correct, that will dismantle part of the prosecutor's accusation." When Aminata returned to her cell, Carmen was waiting for her with a curious expression. "Bad news? Or rather, worse news." Aminata collapsed on her bunk. "Not only do I have to prove I speak 10 languages in front of professors who have already decided I'm lying, but I also have to prove that translations I know I did correctly, have no errors, and defend myself against a psychological evaluation that will probably paint me as delusional." Carmen whistled softly. "When you said you had fire, you weren't kidding. But, Aminata, are you sure you want to go through with this? Could you accept a plea deal, serve a lesser sentence, and move on with your life?" "Give up?" Aminata looked at the ceiling. "Accept that the world is right and I am wrong? I can't, Carmen. If I give up now, I would be betraying my grandmother, all those years of learning, all those girls who have talent but no papers to prove it. Then rest." Carmen turned off the cell light. "Because in 2 days, you're going to need every ounce of strength you have." In the darkness, Aminata closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind raced through vocabulary, grammar, idioms, in each of the languages she had learned. But more than that, she thought of all the times she had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed. The world was about to see what she was capable of. She only hoped it would be enough. Dawn arrived at the detention center with that heavy silence that only exists in places where freedom is a distant memory. Aminata hadn't slept. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind continued to process verb conjugations, grammatical structures, idiomatic expressions in Mandarin, Arabic, German, French. Carmen snored softly on the lower bunk, a comforting sound amidst so much uncertainty. Aminata had spent the night whispering words softly, each language flowing like rivers converging into the ocean of her memory. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her concentration. It was too early for breakfast. The metal door opened, and Officer Torres appeared with a serious expression. "Bello, you have a visitor, consultation room." Carmen woke up with a start. At this hour, who visits someone before dawn? Aminata got down from her bunk, her heart beginning to beat faster. She followed Torres through the empty corridors, the echo of their footsteps resonating like war drums. When they reached the consultation room, the surprise on Aminata's face was evident. Sitting on the other side of the table was an Asian man with a distressed expression and a business briefcase on his lap. She recognized him immediately. "Engineer Chen." "Aminata," he whispered incredulously. David Chen stood up abruptly, his hands visibly trembling. He was one of the 3 clients who had reported her translations as fraudulent. He worked for a tech company that needed documents translated from English to Mandarin for an expansion in China. "Miss Bello, I need to talk to you." His voice came out choked, as if each word cost him physical effort. "I don't have much time. My lawyer doesn't know I'm here." Torres closed the door but remained inside. Standard protocol for unofficially authorized visits. "What are you doing here?" Aminata sat down slowly, trying to process this surreal situation. Chen ran his hands over his face, and Aminata noticed the deep dark circles, the tension in his shoulders. "I came to tell you the truth. The truth I should have told from the beginning." The silence that followed was so dense, Aminata could hear her own pulse. "Your translations were perfect." Chen blurted out the words as if he had been holding his breath for months. "Better than any professional agency we had used before. The partners in Beijing were impressed with the technical accuracy and cultural sensitivity." Aminata felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "Then why?" "Because my boss, the CEO, found out I had hired your services without verifying your university credentials." Chen lowered his gaze, shame evident in every line of his face. "He threatened to fire me if I didn't find a way to justify why I had spent company funds on an uncertified translator, and he decided to ruin my life to save his job." Aminata felt a mixture of fury and vindication growing in her chest. It wasn't that simple. Chen looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Mr. Roberto Fuentes, our corporate lawyer, suggested we report the translations as defective. He said it was the only way to recoup the money and protect the company from any legal liability." "He suggested lying." Aminata's voice rose. "He suggested protecting corporate interests," Chen corrected bitterly. "In the business world, Miss Bello, truth is secondary to financial survival. But I haven't been able to sleep since I signed that false statement. I have a daughter your age. Every time I look at her, I see your face in the news, being publicly humiliated for something you didn't do." Aminata took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not before the trial?" "Because I'm a coward," Chen admitted, his voice breaking. "Because I needed my job, my salary, my reputation, but seeing what they've done to you, seeing Justice Mitchell laugh at you on television was too much. My wife told me last night that I couldn't live with a dishonorable man anymore, and she was right." He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. "Here is everything. Copies of the original translations with our Beijing partners' approvals. Emails where they specifically praised your work. And my affidavit, admitting I lied under corporate pressure. Aminata took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy, filled with pages that could completely change her case. Engineer Chen, do you understand what this means for you? She asked softly. Admitting perjury could send you to prison. I know, Chen smiled sadly, but I'd rather be in prison with my honor intact than free as a liar. My daughter deserves a father she can be proud of. Torres approached the table. Sir, I need to escort you out. This visit is already irregular. Chen stood up, but before leaving, he looked Aminata directly in the eyes. Miss Bello, you are extraordinary. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you allow me some advice, when you're in that courtroom tomorrow, don't just prove you speak those languages. Prove why it matters. Prove that real talent doesn't need certificates to be valid. When he left, Aminata remained alone in the room, clutching the envelope as if it were a lifeline. Tears she had been holding back for days finally began to fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief mixed with rage for all she had endured because of corporate lies. The door opened again, and Fatima Mendoza rushed in, her hair disheveled and her expression a controlled panic. Aminata, what was that? Torres called me saying David Chen was here. What did he want? Aminata handed her the envelope. Our salvation. As Fatima frantically reviewed the documents, her eyes widened with each page. This is incredible. With this, we can completely dismantle the fraud charges. We can prove the translations were correct and the accusations were fabricated. But will it be enough? Aminata asked. I still have to prove I speak the languages. And the prosecutor will probably say Chen is lying now to help me. You're right. Fatima sat down, her mind working at full speed. We need more. We need to find the other 2 clients who accused you. And how do we do that from here? Fatima pulled out her cell phone. Leave it to me. I have contacts. If Chen had a crisis of conscience, maybe the others will too. For the next few hours, as Aminata was escorted back to her cell, Fatima worked frantically, making calls, sending emails, leveraging every contact in her legal arsenal. Back in the cell, Carmen watched Aminata with curiosity. Something changed. You have a different expression. One of my accusers came to confess that he lied, Aminata said, still processing everything. It turns out my translations were perfect. I was falsely accused to protect corporate interests. Carmen whistled softly. The system protecting itself. Same old story. But this time someone had the courage to tell the truth. Aminata looked out the small high window. He risked everything to clear my name. And does that give you hope? It gives me more than hope. It gives me proof that I'm not crazy, that I'm not wrong, that the world is wrong about me. A metallic sound echoed down the corridor. It was library cart time, a trolley that passed twice a week with books for the inmates. A young woman pushed the cart, stopping at each cell. When she reached cell 47C, Aminata recognized her. It was Sofia Morales, a girl of just 19 who she had seen in the dining hall. She had intelligent eyes, and that particular sadness of someone who has seen too much while being too young. Anything you need? Sofia asked in a soft voice. Do you have anything in foreign languages? Aminata asked hopefully. Sofia's eyes lit up. Are you the girl who's going to prove she speaks 10 languages? 11, actually. I have something for you. Sofia glanced nervously down both sides of the corridor before pulling out a package wrapped in paper. Your lawyer asked me to bring this to you. I shouldn't, but hey, I believe in second chances. Aminata unwrapped the package and found 6 books in different languages: Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, and Portuguese. They weren't ordinary books but complex technical legal texts. Your lawyer said to practice with these, Sofia whispered. The professors tomorrow are going to try to trip you up with specialized technical vocabulary. How do you know? Because one of them, Professor Andres Villarreal, came here for a legal consultation a few days ago. I overheard him talking to the director about how to unmask an imposter claiming impossible linguistic skills. Aminata's blood ran cold. Did he say anything else? He said he had prepared specialized technical texts in each language: medical, legal, scientific vocabulary, things only someone with years of formal university study would know. Carmen sat up on her bunk. That's cheating. They're preparing an exam designed for you to fail. It's not cheating if they never promise to be fair, Aminata said. She opened the first book, her eyes scanning the pages in Mandarin. But I can learn. I've always been able to learn. You have less than 24 hours, Sofia pointed out. How are you going to memorize technical vocabulary in 6 languages in one day? Aminata looked at her with that fierce determination that had kept her alive her whole life. The same way I've done everything else, without giving up. When Sophia left, Carmen watched Aminata open book after book, her concentration absolute. You know what's most impressive about you? Carmen said after a long silence. It's not that you speak languages, it's that you never accept defeat as an option. My grandmother used to say, the world will tell you 1,000 times you can't. You only need to prove it once to show them you can. Aminata spent the rest of the day and the entire night immersed in those books. She barely ate, barely moved. Carmen brought her water, reminded her to breathe. But Aminata was in another world, a world of words, meanings, linguistic connections. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the high window, Aminata closed the last book. Her eyes were red, her body trembled with exhaustion, but there was something different in her expression. Ready? Carmen asked. Ready, Aminata replied. Officer Torres arrived early. Bello, it's time. Your lawyer is waiting. Today is the day. As she walked down the corridors towards the exit, other inmates began to bang on their cell doors. It wasn't a threatening sound, but one of support. Many of them had heard her story. Many of them had been judged for what the system thought they were, rather than for who they really were. Show them, someone shouted. Don't let them crush you. Another voice joined in. Aminata felt a strange energy course through her body. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. All those anonymous faces behind metal doors were reminders that there were more people like her, waiting for a chance to prove their truth. Fatima was waiting for her in the processing area with something unexpected. A suitcase. What is this? Aminata asked. Your future. If everything goes well, Fatima said, opening the suitcase to reveal a professional outfit. You're not going into that courtroom as a defendant. You're going in as the professional you are. As Aminata changed, Fatima gave her the latest news. I found the second client. He's willing to testify that his accusation was also false. The third still isn't responding, but 2 out of 3 is enough to create reasonable doubt. And the psychological evaluation. Fatima made a face. Dr. Vasquez submitted her report. It's mixed. It doesn't say you're crazy, but it doesn't fully defend you either. It suggests you have an unconventional personality with high confidence in self-taught skills. That's just a fancy way of saying they don't trust me. Exactly. That's why you need to be perfect today. Not just good, perfect. The transport vehicle took them to the courthouse. The building looked different in the dawn light, more imposing, more intimidating, like a Roman Colosseum where gladiators fought for their lives. But Aminata was no longer the same person who had entered there days ago. Now she had proof, she had allies, and most importantly, she had the truth. The courtroom was even more crowded than the first time. News cameras filled every permitted corner. Journalists whispered among themselves, and in the front row, 10 professors from the state university waited with expressions ranging from curiosity to open disdain. Justice Mitchell entered with his usual arrogance, but when his gaze met Aminata's, something changed in his eyes. Perhaps he recognized that this wouldn't be the easy victory he had anticipated. Let the show begin, he muttered, rapping his gavel. And so began the day that would change everything. Justice Mitchell's gavel echoed like a gunshot in the packed courtroom. The collective murmur instantly died down, replaced by a tension so thick that the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Order in the court. Mitchell pronounced the words with that authoritative tone he had perfected over decades on the bench. His eyes scanned the crowd before settling on the 10 professors seated in a special row before the bench. Professors from the State University, thank you for your presence. Today we will conduct an evaluation that, frankly, I consider a waste of time, but which the defendant has insisted on carrying out. Aminata stood beside Fatima, her posture erect, despite the exhaustion she felt in every fiber of her being. 24 hours without sleep, studying technical vocabulary that most people would take years to master, but she wasn't most people. Professor Andres Villarreal stood up, adjusting his glasses with a gesture that conveyed academic superiority. He was a thin man with dark hair slicked back with gel, and that expression of someone who considers formal knowledge to be the only valid knowledge. Your Lordship, he began, his voice clear and academic. My colleagues and I have prepared a series of rigorous evaluations. This is not simply about conversing in different languages, but about demonstrating technical mastery, deep cultural understanding, and specialized translation capability. Proceed, Mitchell gestured with his hand, leaning back in his chair as if about to witness a cheap magic show. Villarreal opened a thick folder. Miss Bello, we will begin with Mandarin. Professor Yuki Tanaka, although a specialist in Japanese, is also fluent in Mandarin, and will evaluate this first section. A middle-aged Asian woman stood up. Professor Tanaka had a serene presence, but her gaze was analytical, dissecting Aminata with every passing second. Professor Tanaka spoke in flawless Mandarin, asking Aminata to read a medical text and then explain its meaning in Spanish. She handed Aminata a document. It was a complex medical text on cardiovascular procedures, filled with technical terminology that would make any professional translator sweat. The room held its breath. Aminata read the document silently for 30 seconds. Then, without hesitation, she began to speak in fluent Mandarin. Her pronunciation was impeccable, her tones precise. She didn't just read the text, she explained it, adding cultural context about how certain Chinese medical terms differ in concept from Western ones. She then switched to Spanish without pause, translating not just the words, but the profound meaning, explaining the medical implications with a level of detail that left even Professor Tanaka gaping. The professor murmured something in Mandarin to Villarreal, commenting that Aminata's pronunciation was perfect and impossible for someone without formal training. "I know," Aminata replied in the same language, looking directly at Tanaka, "because I learned from the Chen family, diplomats who lived 6 years in Beijing. Their young daughter taught me not only the language but the songs, the games, the ways of thinking. Language isn't just words, Professor, it's soul." A murmur ran through the room. Journalist Marco Delgado furiously scribbled in his notebook. This was journalistic gold. "Next language," Villarreal said curtly, clearly uncomfortable with what he had just witnessed. "German," Professor Hans Müller. Müller was a burly man with a blonde beard and a stern, typically Germanic expression. He stood up and spoke in clipped German with a deliberately complicated accent, asking Aminata to explain the clauses of a legal contract and their legal implications. He handed her a dense legal contract, filled with German legal jargon that even native lawyers would find challenging. Aminata read it, and again, her response was more than perfect. She didn't just translate. She identified potential legal problems in the contract, pointed out linguistic ambiguities that could cause disputes, and did it all while fluidly alternating between German and Spanish. Müller looked at her with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. He asked her in German where she had learned all that. Aminata replied in fluent German before translating into Spanish. "From the Schneider family. Mr. Schneider was an international lawyer. His wife would have me sit in his office while he worked. I was 10 years old and would read his contracts while he thought I was just drawing. She learned that German legal language is like a puzzle where every word has exact weight." Fatima Mendoza watched with tears in her eyes. This was more than she had hoped for. Aminata wasn't just demonstrating competence, she was demonstrating mastery. Arabic, Villarreal, practically spat the word. Professor Amira Hassan. Hassan was an elegant woman with an intelligent, calculating expression. She spoke in classical Arabic, the kind used in religious and academic texts, deliberately archaic and complex. She asked Aminata to read a religious text and explain its profound philosophical meaning. It was a text with complex philosophical commentary. Aminata closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, something different was in her expression. She began to recite in Arabic, her voice taking on that particular melodic cadence of well-spoken language. She didn't just translate the text, she explained the multiple layers of interpretation, the historical references, the theological debates that the passage had generated for centuries. She spoke about how classical Arabic differs from modern Arabic, about the inherent poetry in each verse. Hassan stood up, visibly moved. "How is this possible?" "This requires years of theological study." "Al-Rahman family," Aminata replied softly in Spanish. "The father was an imam. He taught me that Arabic is not just a language. It's a way of seeing the universe, that every word has a root, a history, a connection to other words. It's a language that breathes poetry." Justice Mitchell was no longer leaning back in his chair. He was leaning forward. His expression had changed from mockery to something that might have been involuntary respect. One by one, the professors presented their challenges. Russian, with Professor Igor Volkov, who asked her to recite classical literature and explain complex literary symbolism. French, with culinary and wine terminology so specific that only a sommelier or professional chef would know it. Italian, with opera and music. Brazilian Portuguese, with complex regional idioms. Japanese, with multiple writing systems. Korean, with intricate levels of formality. Each time, Aminata not only met but exceeded expectations. And each time she added that personal dimension, that learning story that revealed not just technical knowledge but profound understanding and genuine love for each language. When Professor Volkov asked her to explain a passage of Russian classical literature, Aminata not only translated the words but captured the melancholic soul of the text, explaining historical and emotional contexts that only someone truly immersed in Russian culture could understand. The Ivanov family, she explained. Mr. Ivanov was a literature professor. He would read me Dostoevsky while his wife prepared borscht. I was 12 years old and cried with the stories. He told me that if you can't feel the Russian suffering in the words, you aren't truly reading the masters. The professor evaluating French presented her with a text about wines with terminology so specialized that it seemed designed to make even professional translators fail. Aminata not only identified every grape variety, every wine region mentioned, but explained the cultural subtleties of why certain French words for describing wine have no exact translation in Spanish. Monsieur Dubois was a sommelier, she explained with a nostalgic smile. He would let me smell the wines while he worked. He said that French wine language is liquid poetry. Every word evokes land, sun, time. It's not translated, it's felt. But then came the moment that would change everything. The last language was Hebrew. Villarreal, who also mastered Hebrew in addition to Spanish, stood up personally for this evaluation. He had saved what he considered his masterstroke for last. Miss Bello, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This last text is particularly challenging. It is an ancient philosophical treatise on ethics and justice, extremely complex, even for dedicated scholars. He handed her the document. Aminata began to read, and suddenly her expression changed. It wasn't confusion or difficulty, it was recognition. Professor Villarreal, she said slowly, this text, I know this text. I translated it. You know it, Villarreal smiled smugly. I highly doubt you had access to ancient Hebrew philosophical manuscripts. No, the manuscript. Aminata looked up, her eyes shining with something dangerous. 6 years ago, when I was 17, I worked for an online translation service under a pseudonym. An anonymous client requested the translation of this ancient Hebrew philosophical treatise into modern Spanish. He paid well, but asked for complete anonymity. I spent 3 weeks working on this, researching every word, every concept. It was one of my first professional jobs. She turned to Villarreal, her voice gaining strength. And you, Professor Villarreal, published an academic paper 4 years ago titled New Interpretations of Ancient Hebrew Ethical Texts. I read that paper. You used my translation word for word, without credit. The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. Villarreal paled visibly. That's an absurd accusation, he stammered. Do you have any proof? I have all my work files, Aminata replied calmly, including translation notes, preliminary versions, correspondence with the client, everything saved on my computer, the same computer in the prosecution's possession as evidence. Fatima Mendoza jumped to her feet. Your Lordship, I request immediate access to those digital files. If what my client says is true, this not only demonstrates her competence, but exposes academic plagiarism. Prosecutor Bradford looked like a cornered animal. Your Lordship, this is a distraction. It is not relevant to the case. Not relevant? Mitchell finally found his voice. Mr. Bradford, if the defendant can prove that one of the evaluators I selected used her work without credit, that is extremely relevant to this case. It shows she is not only competent, but has been competent for years. He turned to Villarreal, his expression now cold. Professor Villarreal, do you have anything to say? Villarreal opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The other professors looked at him with a mixture of shock and disgust. In the academic world, plagiarism was the unforgivable sin. I received that translation from a colleague. I didn't know it was from an online service. I assumed it was public work. You assumed. Professor Hassan stood up, her voice cutting. Professor Villarreal, academic protocol requires verifying the source of all material. This is basic, Professor Müller added sternly. If this is true, the State University will have to investigate formally. Mitchell struck his gavel. Order! Bailiff Cooper, bring the computer from evidence. Now. While they waited, Aminata remained standing, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. She had waited 6 years for this moment. 6 years since she saw her work published under someone else's name. She never thought justice would come this way, but life had strange ways of closing circles. Cooper returned with the laptop in an evidence bag. The court technician turned it on, and under judicial supervision, Fatima navigated to the files Aminata indicated. There it was. Preliminary versions of the translation dated 6 years ago. Detailed notes, explaining every translation decision, emails with the client, and most damningly, the final version, identical word for word to what Villarreal had published in his supposedly original paper. Mitchell examined the files personally, his expression growing darker with each document he reviewed. Finally, he looked up at Villarreal. "Professor, I strongly suggest you contact your union. You will need legal representation." He turned to the other 9 professors. "Does anyone else have doubts about Miss Bellow's linguistic competence?" One by one, each professor shook his head. Professor Hassan even stood up. "Your Lordship, in my 20 years evaluating linguistic competence, I have never seen anyone with the mastery this young woman has demonstrated today. She doesn't just speak these languages, she lives them. She understands them at levels most academics can only aspire to. And she did it without resources, without privilege, only with determination and genuine love for learning." Hassan's words resonated in the room. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. For the first time in decades, he seemed genuinely unsure how to proceed. "Mr. Bradford," he finally said, "do you have anything further to present?" The prosecutor stood up slowly. He knew he had lost. "Your Lordship, in light of these developments, and considering that 2 of the 3 plaintiff clients have withdrawn their accusations and confessed to lying under corporate pressure, the prosecution requests. He requests to withdraw all charges." The murmur in the room turned into a roar. Mitchell rapped his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in my court!" When silence returned, Mitchell looked at Aminata for a long moment. In his eyes was something that had never been there before. "Miss Bellow," he began, his voice unusually soft, "this court owes you an apology. I owe you an apology. I allowed prejudice to cloud my judgment. I assumed that extraordinary talent requires institutional validation when you have demonstrated that true talent transcends institutions." He paused, as if the next words took physical effort to pronounce. "All charges against you are dismissed. You are free of all accusations. Furthermore, I order that your computer and all your personal effects be returned to you immediately." He struck the gavel one last time. "This case is closed." The room erupted in applause. Fatima hugged Aminata, both of them crying. Journalists scrambled for the exits to publish the news. The professors surrounded Aminata, offering apologies, job offers, academic opportunities. But Aminata could only think of one thing. Finally, after a lifetime of being underestimated, the world had heard her voice, and that voice had spoken in 11 languages. The doors of the New Hope Detention Center opened with a metallic screech that sounded like celestial music. Aminata took her first step as a free woman in days that had felt like years. The afternoon sun hit her face with an intensity that almost made her recoil. Freedom, vindication, justice. But the scene that awaited her outside was not the tranquility she had imagined. Dozens of journalists descended upon her like waves crashing against the shore, cameras flashing, microphones extending like tentacles, voices shouting questions that blended into an incomprehensible chaos. "Miss Bellow, how do you feel? Is Aminata Bellow going to sue Justice Mitchell? Tell us about Professor Villarreal. Is it true she speaks 11 languages?" Fatima appeared beside her, forming a protective shield with her body as they tried to make their way to the waiting vehicle. But before they could advance 2 meters, an elegant woman stepped directly into their path. She was imposing in stature, with silver hair perfectly coiffed, a suit that screamed power and money. Linda Harrington, according to the corporate ID hanging from her neck, CEO of Harrington Global Translation Services. "Miss Bellow," her voice cut through the surrounding noise with natural authority. "I am Linda Harrington. I need to speak with you now." "Mrs. Harrington, my client has just been released," Fatima intervened. "This is not an appropriate time. I understand perfectly, but what I have to tell you cannot wait." Harrington looked directly at Aminata, completely ignoring Fatima. "Your case has generated international attention. I have 17 job offers from different countries for you, and something more important, information about your grandmother, which I believe you will want to hear." Aminata stopped short. "My grandmother? What do you know about my grandmother?" "Not here." Harrington gestured towards a black limousine parked discreetly half a block away. 5 minutes of your time. If afterwards you want to leave, I will personally take you wherever you wish." Fatima squeezed Aminata's arm as a warning, but there was something in Harrington's eyes that wasn't threatening. It was urgency, mixed with respect. "All right, Aminata," she agreed. 5 minutes. Inside the limousine, away from the chaos of journalists, Harrington handed her a leather folder. 20 years ago, I was the human resources director at one of the most prestigious translation agencies in the country. Your grandmother, Lucia Bello, applied for a position. We rejected her. Aminata felt a pang of pain in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because we made the same mistake the system made with you. Lucia spoke 6 languages fluently, but she had no university degrees. We rejected her without even properly evaluating her. She wrote me a letter after that interview, a letter I kept for 2 decades because I was too ashamed to reread it. Harrington pulled a yellowed envelope from the folder. The handwriting was her grandmother's. Aminata would recognize it anywhere. Read it, Harrington insisted, her hands trembling. Aminata opened the envelope and began to read. Her grandmother's words flowed from the page like a river of wisdom and pain. Dear Mrs. Harrington, I don't blame you for rejecting me. The world runs on papers, not abilities. But I want you to know that I will dedicate my life to ensuring my granddaughter never has to beg for opportunities she deserves. I will teach her everything I know, and someday, when she succeeds, I hope she remembers that talent needs no external validation to be real. Aminata finished reading, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her grandmother had always known. She had always planned to prepare her for a world that would reject them both. When I saw your case in the news, Harrington continued softly, I knew immediately who you were, Lucia's granddaughter, the child she told me about in that letter, and I realized I had an opportunity to correct a mistake I made 2 decades ago. What do you want from me? Aminata asked directly. I want to hire you, not as a common translator, but as director of unconventional talent. Your job will be to identify and recruit people like you. People with extraordinary skills but no traditional credentials. People the system overlooks. The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true, but something in Harrington's expression told Aminata there was more. What else? She pressed. Harrington smiled slightly. You're perceptive. All right. There's something else. Your grandmother worked for many diplomatic families, as you know, but there was one family in particular, the Morrisons, for whom she worked for the last 5 years of her life, were British diplomats. They left the country abruptly 3 years ago and left something for you, something your grandmother asked them to keep until you were ready. Mr. Morrison contacted me yesterday after seeing your case in the news. He's in town and wants to meet with you. Before Aminata could respond, her phone, recently returned by the police, began to ring incessantly. Missed calls, text messages, social media notifications exploding. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from an unknown number with an international prefix. Miss Bello, I am Agent Samuel Cross from the International Organization for Refugees. Your story has resonated with millions. We have a proposal that could change lives. Please contact me urgently. Fatima, who had been checking her own phone, looked up with an expression of shock. Aminata, you need to see this. She showed her screen. The hearing video had gone viral, over 15 million views in less than 6 hours. The hashtag number Justice for Aminata was trending worldwide. But that wasn't all. There was another video posted just minutes ago. Someone had leaked security footage from the detention center. It clearly showed Aminata studying all night, murmuring in different languages, preparing with a determination that bordered on the superhuman. The whole world is talking about you, Fatima murmured. You're a symbol now. I don't want to be a symbol, Aminata replied, her voice weary. I just want to live my life. Too late for that, Harrington interjected pragmatically. You now have a platform. The question is, what are you going to do with it? The phone rang again. This time, it was a number Aminata recognized, Carmen Erchelmate. Aminata, I need you to come. It's urgent, Carmen. What's wrong? It's about the center director. It turns out he also has secrets, and I think they're connected to your grandmother. But I can't talk on the phone. You have to come. The call cut off abruptly. Aminata looked at Fatima with growing alarm. Something is wrong. Carmen sounded scared. Before they could decide what to do, another figure appeared in the limousine window. An older man in his late 60s, with a gentle but urgent expression, tapped softly on the glass. Harrington lowered the window. Dr. Ruiz. Mrs. Harrington, thank you for contacting me. The man spoke with a refined British accent. Miss Bello, I am Fernando Ruiz. I was the personal physician to the Morrison family for years. I also attended to your grandmother, Lucia, in her final months. Aminata got out of the limousine, feeling the world spinning too fast. You knew my grandmother. I knew her very well. And there are things about her death you need to know. Things she made me promise to tell you when the time was right. What things? Dr. Ruiz looked around nervously. No, there are people here who would prefer certain information remain buried. Your grandmother didn't die of a simple heart attack. Miss Bello. There were complications she kept secret. Complications related to something she discovered while working for the Morrisons. Aminata's heart began to pound. What did she discover? Documents. Sensitive information about trafficking networks that use diplomatic families as cover. Your grandmother reported them to the appropriate authorities, but she died before she could formally testify. The world of Aminata stopped. Are you saying my grandmother was? I don't know for sure, the doctor quickly interrupted. What I do know is that she left evidence behind. Evidence that the Morrisons protected after her death. And now that you are in the public eye, there are people who will want to ensure that evidence never sees the light of day. Fatima moved protectively beside Aminata. Dr. Ruiz, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof? I have Lucia's complete medical records, and I have the letters she wrote me in her final days. Letters where she specifically mentioned that if anything happened to her, I should contact her granddaughter when she was strong enough to handle the truth. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. This is just the beginning, Miss Bello. Your grandmother documented everything meticulously. Names, dates, routes. She kept it all in a safety deposit box at an international bank, and you are the only person authorized to open it. Aminata took the envelope, feeling its weight not just physically, but emotionally. Where is that box? Geneva, Switzerland, Helvetia International Bank. Your grandmother gave me the exact instructions before she died. She said, when Aminata proves to the world what she is capable of, when she can no longer be ignored or silenced, then she will be ready to know the whole truth. The words echoed in the silence of the limousine. Her whole life. Aminata had thought her grandmother was simply a domestic worker who loved languages, but now she was discovering she had been much more, a woman who had witnessed injustices and had the courage to confront them, even knowing the price she might pay. Is there anything else? Dr. Ruiz added, his expression becoming even more serious. The third client who accused you, the one who never withdrew his charges. His name is Richard Blackwood. He works for a private security corporation with deep connections in diplomatic circles. I don't think it's a coincidence that he was the only one who maintained the accusations until the end. Are you suggesting my accusation was orchestrated? Aminata felt a chill run down her spine. I'm suggesting that when your case became public, certain people saw an opportunity to discredit you before you could uncover what your grandmother knew. Fatima grabbed her phone. We need police protection now. But before I can make the call, a black van screeched to a halt in front of the limousine. A middle-aged man got out, his expression serious, federal identification hanging from his neck. I am Agent Samuel Cross, Miss Bello. I need you to come with me. Your life may be in danger. How did you know where to find me? Aminata asked, her survival instincts kicking in. Because we've been monitoring communications related to your case and just intercepted a very disturbing conversation. There is an active contract on you. Someone wants to ensure you never make it to Geneva. The world Aminata had just regained was about to become much more dangerous, and the answers she sought were thousands of miles away in a safety deposit box containing secrets someone was willing to kill to protect. The decision was instantaneous. Aminata looked Agent Cross directly in the eyes. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Carmen. She needs me. Miss Bello, you don't understand the gravity, Cross insisted. There are dangerous people looking for you right now, and there's a friend who risked everything to help me when no one else would. Aminata replied firmly. I won't abandon her now. Fatima touched her arm. Aminata, maybe you should listen to them. I'll go with you. Dr. Ruiz unexpectedly intervened. If there's a connection between the center director and what your grandmother discovered, you need to know, and I can help protect you. Harrington closed her phone. I have contacts in private security. I can have a team there in 10 minutes. Cross sighed, recognizing he had lost this battle. All right, but I'm coming with you, and if I see anything suspicious, we leave immediately. 15 minutes later, they were back at the New Hope Detention Center. The building Aminata had left with relief now greeted her with a sense of threat she hadn't felt before. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting ominous shadows in the white corridors. Officer Daniela Cortez, a young guard with a kind expression who had always been gentle with Aminata, met them at the entrance. Miss Bello, thank you for coming, she whispered nervously. Carmen is very upset. She keeps saying the director has something to do with your grandmother. I don't understand what she means, but she insists she'll only talk to you. Where is Director Mendez? Cross asked professionally. In his office. He's been making calls all day. Ever since Miss Bello's case went viral, he's been extremely nervous. Cortez guided them through corridors. Aminata knew all too well. When they reached cell 47C, Carmen was sitting on her bunk, hugging her knees, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. Aminata leaped up as the door opened. "Thank God you came," Carmen whispered. "I thought maybe you wouldn't after all you went through here." "Carmen, what's wrong? What did you discover?" Carmen looked nervously at the others present. Cross showed his federal identification. "Everything you say here is protected. If you have relevant information, we need to hear it." Carmen took a deep breath. 2 days ago, I was cleaning near Director Mendez's office. The door was ajar, and I overheard a phone conversation. He was talking to someone about Aminata. He was saying things like, "The old woman was a problem, and the granddaughter can't know what she found." Aminata's heart stopped. "The old woman? You mean my grandmother?" "That's what I thought at first, but I wasn't sure." Then, today, after you were released, he was even more agitated. He made another call. This time I heard clearly. He mentioned the name Lucia Bello and something about documents that should never have fallen into her granddaughter's hands. Dr. Ruiz stepped forward. "Carmen, did he mention anything about the Morrison families or about international networks?" "Yes." Carmen nodded vigorously. "He said the Morrisons were fools for keeping those papers, that they should have destroyed them when they had the chance." Cross pulled out his phone and began making urgent calls. Fatima sat down, her mind working at full speed, processing the legal implications. But Aminata could only feel one thing: rage. Rage that her grandmother had been put in danger. Rage that possibly her death hadn't been natural. Rage that even now, years later, the shadows of the past were still haunting them. "I need to talk to him," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I need to talk to Mendez now." "Aminata, that's not prudent," Fatima warned. "I don't care about prudence." Aminata turned to Cross. "You're a federal agent. You can make this official. I need answers about my grandmother." Cross considered for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll ask some questions, but you're coming with me, and if it gets dangerous, we leave immediately." Director Augusto Mendez's office was on the 3rd floor. He was a thick-set man with thinning hair and the kind of nervousness that only guilt can generate. When Cross entered, showing his federal identification, the color drained from his face. "Agent, how can I help you?" His voice trembled slightly. "Director Mendez, I have some questions about Lucia Bello." The director blinked repeatedly. "Lucia Bello? I don't know anyone by that name." "Liar." Aminata entered the office, ignoring Cross's attempt to stop her. "My grandmother worked cleaning this center during her last year of life. You knew her, and it seems you also knew what she had discovered." Mendez stood up abruptly. "Miss, I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let me refresh your memory." Cross pulled out his recorder. "I have witnesses who heard you talking about the old woman and about documents. Care to explain that to me?" The director began to sweat visibly. His eyes darted between Cross, Aminata, and the door, like a trapped animal seeking escape. I only worked here. I didn't know anything about what she did outside, but I did know something." Aminata leaned over the desk. "My grandmother died 2 years ago. Her death was sudden, convenient, just before she could testify about what she had discovered." "I had nothing to do with her death," Mendez shouted, losing his composure. "It was her heart. The doctors said so." "Then you did know her," Cross observed coldly. "A moment ago, you said you didn't know anyone by that name." Mendez sank into his chair, defeated. All right. I knew Lucia. She worked here cleaning for months. She was a good woman, quiet. But one day she came to me with information. Dangerous information." "What information?" Aminata felt tears threatening to escape, but she held them back with sheer willpower. She said that while working for diplomatic families, she had seen things. Documents about people being moved illegally, families being used as cover for criminal operations. She showed me copies. She asked me to help her report it to the appropriate authorities, and I did. Mendez lowered his gaze, unable to meet Aminata's eyes. "I told her I would, but I was scared. The people involved were powerful. They had connections. They had money. So I reported her intentions to someone else." The silence that fell in the office was heavier than any verbal accusation. "You betrayed her," Aminata whispered the words, barely audible. "My grandmother trusted you, and you sold her out. I didn't know what they were going to do." Mendez was openly sobbing now. "They only told me they would keep her under surveillance, that they would make sure she didn't cause trouble. I never thought they would kill her. I don't know if they did." Aminata finished the sentence. "Her death was natural, according to all reports, but I always wondered. I always lived with that doubt." Cross was already on the phone, requesting forensic teams, arrest warrants, full investigations, but Aminata could barely hear anything beyond the roar of blood in her ears. Dr. Ruiz placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Aminata, is there anything else you need to know? something your grandmother gave me before she died. From his briefcase, he pulled out a small, time-worn envelope. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I think now is the time. With trembling hands, Aminata opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in her grandmother's handwriting, the same handwriting she had seen in cookbooks, in shopping notes, in loving maternal messages. My dearest Aminata, it began, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. It means Dr. Ruiz kept his promise, and it means you are finally strong enough to know the whole truth. All your life, I taught you languages. I taught you that words have power, that communication builds bridges, that understanding others is understanding the world. But I never told you why it was so important to me that you learn. When I was young, I witnessed injustices I couldn't stop. I saw people being exploited, families being separated, innocents being hurt. And I could do nothing because I had no power, no voice, no way to be heard. But you, my love, you have something I never had. You have the gift of tongues. You can speak for those who have no voice. You can translate not just words, but injustices into justice, silence into truth. The documents I left in Geneva are not just evidence of crimes. They are the voices of people who need to be heard, and you are the only one who can give them that voice. I know the path will be difficult. I know there will be people who try to silence you as they tried to silence me, but I also know that you are stronger than I ever was. Because you not only have knowledge, you have courage. Do not cry for me, my child. If my heart stops before I can see your triumph, I will know it was because it gave everything to prepare you, and that is enough. Every language I taught you, every story I shared, every moment we spent together was preparing you for this moment, for when the world would finally hear you. Now go to Geneva, open that box, tell those stories, give voice to the silenced, and when you do, you will know that your grandmother is proud, not because you speak 10 languages or 20, but because you chose to use your gift for something bigger than yourself. I love you, my child. I always loved you. I always will. Your grandmother, Lucia. Aminata finished reading, and the tears she had held back for days finally flowed freely. They were not tears of sadness alone, but of understanding, of purpose, of love that transcended even death. Carmen hugged her, crying too. Fatima had tears rolling down her cheeks. Even Cross, the hardened federal agent, had to discreetly wipe his eyes. Dr. Ruiz spoke softly. Your grandmother knew her time was limited. Her heart was weak, and the stress of what she had discovered worsened it. But she didn't stop. She kept documenting. She kept gathering evidence. She kept fighting because she knew you would continue her work. Aminata folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest as if it were her grandmother's embrace. I will go to Geneva, she said, her voice clear despite the tears. I will finish what she started. You won't go alone. Harrington entered the office, her expression determined. My company has offices in Switzerland. You will have all the protection and resources you need. And I'm coming with you, Fatima added. As your lawyer and your friend, Carmen said surprisingly. I'll be released in 2 days, and after what they did to your grandmother, I want to help. Cross closed his phone. The FBI is interested in this case. You will have federal protection during the trip, and Mendez turned to the cowering director. He is arrested for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. As Mendez was escorted out of his office in handcuffs, Aminata felt something change within her. She was no longer just a young woman trying to prove her worth. She was the heir to a legacy of courage and justice. Her grandmother had planted seeds of hope in the form of languages. Now those seeds had grown into something more powerful, a voice that could not be silenced. At that moment, Harrington's phone rang. She answered briefly, her expression turning serious. It was Mrs. Morrison. She's in town. She says she has something else your grandmother left her, something she didn't even trust the bank with. She wants to meet you tonight. Aminata nodded. Each revelation brought her closer to fully understanding who her grandmother had been and what she had sacrificed. Then let's go, she said. There's no more time to waste because somewhere, in a safety deposit box in Geneva, waited truths that would change lives, and Aminata Bello was ready to give them voice. The hotel where Mrs. Margaret Morrison was staying was one of those places that whispered stories of lives, lived with elegance and purpose. Aminata, accompanied by Fatima, Dr. Ruiz, and Harrington, was greeted in a suite with a view of the illuminated city. Margaret Morrison was a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, blue eyes that had seen too much of the world, and that dignity that only comes from a life dedicated to serving something larger than oneself. When she saw Aminata, her eyes filled with tears. You are exactly as she said you would be, Margaret whispered, taking Aminata's hands in hers. Lucia spoke of you every day. She said you were her masterpiece, her living legacy. Mrs. Morrison, what do you know about my grandmother? Margaret invited them to sit. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared. Your grandmother Lucia worked for my family for 5 years. She wasn't just our employee, she was part of our family. My husband was a British ambassador, and Lucia was with us in every posting. But what no one knew is that Lucia had a special gift. She could read people, understand intentions, and her knowledge of languages allowed her to overhear conversations that others believed were private. Margaret paused, her eyes distant with memories. One night, during a diplomatic reception at our home, Lucia was serving when she overheard a conversation in Russian between 2 diplomats. They were discussing a network that used diplomatic families as a cover to move people against their will. The silence in the room was absolute. Lucia came to me that night, trembling. She told me everything. My husband and I were horrified. He wanted to report it immediately, but Lucia insisted on gathering more evidence first. For months, she documented everything meticulously. Names, dates, routes. She used her invisible position to be present at meetings where no one thought she understood what was being said. And why didn't they report it when they had sufficient evidence? Margaret stood up and went to a small chest on the table. Because we discovered that the network had connections at high levels of multiple governments. We didn't know whom to trust. Then, my husband died. Sudden heart attack during a diplomatic meeting. Her voice broke. Officially it was his heart, but I always wondered. Just before he died, he had said he was ready to expose everything, regardless of the consequences. Lucia was afraid after that, Margaret continued. Afraid something would happen to her too, but not afraid for herself. Afraid of leaving you alone, Aminata. So she gave me this. She opened the chest and pulled out a small external hard drive and a thick envelope. Here is everything. Audio recordings of diplomatic meetings where these operations were discussed, photographs, original documents, and most importantly, testimonies of victims whom Lucia knew and secretly helped for years. Aminata took the drive with trembling hands. It was small, but it contained the weight of entire lives. Is there anything else? Margaret added softly. The box in Geneva contains the documentary evidence, but this, she pointed to the drive, contains the voices, the real stories of people who were silenced. Lucia recorded them with their permission in their own languages. She knew that you would be the one to finally translate them, to give them voice to the world. That night, Aminata barely slept, headphones on, listening hour after hour to the recordings. Voices in Mandarin, in Arabic, in Russian, in languages she knew intimately. Stories of families torn apart, of broken promises, of destroyed hopes. And in every recording, at the end, was her grandmother's voice, her maternal bird, promising that her stories would be told. When dawn broke, Aminata had dry tears on her cheeks, but renewed fire in her soul. The flight to Geneva departed the next day. Aminata traveled with Fatima, Carmen, who had been released as promised, Harrington, and a security escort coordinated by Agent Cross. The FBI had discovered that Richard Blackwood, the third client, was actually a private security operative hired to discredit Aminata before she became a public voice. He was arrested, attempting to leave the country. Geneva welcomed them with gray skies, but with promises of justice. The Helvetia International Bank was a fortress of marble and steel, designed to protect secrets for generations. In a private room with a Swiss notary present, Aminata opened safety deposit box number 4721. Inside were meticulously organized folders, each labeled in her grandmother's handwriting, with names, dates, locations. But what impacted Aminata most was finding at the bottom of the box a photo album, photos of herself through the years. Her first day of school, learning to write in Arabic, reading books in French. Each photo had a note from her grandmother on the back. The last photo was of Aminata at 16, smiling as she held a certificate from an online translation course. The note read, "The day I knew you were ready, only the world was missing to be ready too." Aminata hugged the album to her chest, sobbing. Fatima hugged her, then Carmen, then everyone present. It was a moment of pain and love, intertwined so deeply that no words in any language could adequately describe it. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Aminata, with the help of Fatima and an international legal team, presented all the evidence to the International Court of Justice. The case caused an earthquake in diplomatic circles. 3 international networks were dismantled. 17 corrupt officials were arrested in 6 different countries. But more important than the arrests was what Aminata did with the recordings. She created a documentary titled Voices of Silence. In it, she personally translated each testimony, giving voice to those who had been silenced. She didn't just translate words, she captured emotions, cultural contexts, the essential humanity of each story. The documentary went viral globally. Over 100 million views in the first week. Governments were forced to respond. Policies changed. Lives were saved. Ambassador Klaus Zimmermann of the United Nations personally contacted Aminata. Miss Bello, your work has exposed injustices that governments have ignored for decades. On behalf of the United Nations, I would like to offer you a position as a special human rights translator. Your work would be to give voice to people the world needs to hear. Aminata accepted, but with one condition, that the position include a program to identify and train other young talents without formal credentials. True talent, she argued, should not need institutional validation to be recognized. Her proposal was unanimously accepted. 6 months later, Aminata stood in the same courtroom where she had once been humiliated. But this time, not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker at an international conference on linguistic justice. Justice Harrison Mitchell was present in the audience. He had retired early after his handling of Aminata's case led to investigations into other cases where he might have allowed prejudice to affect his judgment. At the end of her speech, Mitchell approached her. Miss Bello. His voice was humble, so different from the arrogant man he had been. There is no apology sufficient for how I treated you, but I want you to know that your case changed my life. It forced me to confront prejudices I didn't even know I had. I am now working with the judicial system to implement reforms that will prevent other judges from making the same mistakes I did. Judge Mitchell, Aminata replied, forgiveness does not erase the harm, but it opens paths towards something better. Your acknowledgement means more than your apologies because it shows that people can change, learn, grow. They shook hands, and in that gesture, there was healing, not just for them, but as a symbol of what the judicial system could become. Carmen had rebuilt her life with Harrington's help. She now worked coordinating rehabilitation programs for wrongly imprisoned individuals. You gave me hope when I had none, she told Aminata. Now I want to give that same hope to others. Fatima Mendoza received national recognition as Public Defender of the Year, but what made her most proud were the letters she received from grateful clients, inspired by her passionate defense of Aminata. Professor Villarreal resigned his position after a university investigation confirmed multiple cases of plagiarism. His fall served as a warning to other academics about the importance of integrity. David Chen, the engineer who had had the courage to confess first, established a foundation dedicated to supporting unconventional talents. Aminata taught me that honor is worth more than money or position, he explained in an interview. Sophia, the young woman from the detention center who had risked her job to help Aminata, received a full scholarship to study social work, sponsored by the program Aminata had established. A year after the day Aminata had been arrested, she stood before the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She had traveled from Geneva specifically for this moment. She placed fresh flowers on the grave and knelt. Grandmother, she said softly, I finished what you started. The voices you helped protect are now being heard by the whole world. The networks you documented have been dismantled. The people who tried to silence us failed. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the nearby trees, as if nature itself were listening. But more than that, Aminata understood her grandmother's actions. Grandmother, I finally understood why you taught me all those languages. It wasn't just about words. It was about empathy, about connection, about understanding that every person, regardless of their language or origin, has a story that deserves to be heard. Aminata took the photo album from her bag, the one she had found in the safety deposit box. She opened it to the last page where she had taped a new photo. It was of herself, standing in front of the United Nations, surrounded by people from all corners of the globe, people whose stories she had translated, whose voices she had amplified. Look, grandmother, she said, this is what we built together. Her grandmother's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her legacy lived on in every person who now had a voice thanks to what she had taught her. As the sun set, Aminata stood there, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Her grandmother had sown seeds of hope in the form of languages. Those seeds had grown into a garden of justice that would continue to flourish long after both of them were gone. The next day, Aminata taught her first class in the program she had created. 30 young people from diverse backgrounds, all with extraordinary talents but no formal credentials, looked at her with hope and admiration. My grandmother used to tell me, Aminata began, that talent doesn't need certificates to be real, it just needs opportunities to shine. You are all here because each of you has a unique gift. My job isn't to teach you, but to help you recognize the power you already possess within. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Miss Bello, how do we know we're good enough? Aminata smiled, remembering when she herself had asked that question. Why are you here? Because you dared to try when the world told you you couldn't. That determination, that courage, is more valuable than any university degree. Months turned into years. Aminata's program grew, expanding to 20 countries. Thousands of young talents found opportunities they otherwise never would have had. Some became translators, others cultural mediators, others human rights activists. But they all shared something in common: the belief that true talent transcends credentials, and that every voice, no matter how silenced, deserves to be heard. At a special ceremony at the United Nations, Aminata received the International Human Rights Award. As she held the recognition, she thought of all the people who had made this moment possible. Her grandmother, who had sacrificed everything; Carmen, who had believed in her when she was at her lowest; Fatima, who had fought for her against all odds; Chen, who had found the courage to tell the truth. In her acceptance speech, Aminata didn't talk about her achievements. She spoke about her grandmother. Lucia Bello never had a university degree, never received official recognition for her work, but she understood something the world is only beginning to learn: that a person's worth is not measured in certificates, but in character, not in credentials, but in courage. Her voice broke slightly with emotion. This award is not mine, it is hers. It is for every person who was ever underestimated, ignored, silenced. It is a reminder that extraordinary talent can come from ordinary places, and that sometimes the most powerful people are those the world never noticed. The ovation that followed lasted 5 full minutes. People from around the world connected virtually applauded not just Aminata, but all the Lucias of the world, all the grandmothers, mothers, invisible workers, who had planted seeds of hope without knowing if they would ever bloom. That night, Aminata was in her apartment in Geneva, looking at the illuminated city. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Miss Bello, I am Maria. I am 16 years old and live in a small village in Guatemala. I saw your documentary. I speak 5 languages that I learned from tourists visiting my village. Everyone tells me it's impossible for it to be true without formal education. But you gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I too can have a future. I can apply to your program. Aminata smiled, tears in her eyes. Of course, you can, Maria. Tell me your story. And as she listened to Maria's story, Aminata understood that this was her grandmother's true legacy. Not the dismantled networks or the awards received, but every individual life that was touched, every talent that was recognized, every voice that was finally heard. The cycle continued. Hope multiplied, and somewhere, Aminata was sure, her grandmother Lucia was smiling. Because in the end, this was never a story about languages or injustice or trials. It was a story about love. The love of a grandmother who prepared her granddaughter to change the world. Love that transcended death, time, and circumstance. And that love, translated into 11 languages and 1,000 acts of courage, had illuminated the world.